Um, yes, wonderful question. Yeah, I was just testing this feature with the pop-up and sign up for imagi. If you would like to follow along and code along, which I think would be wonderful, then I recommend that you already get started and sign up. You can also sign up later, but I'm just gonna put the link into the chat now. So in this session, we will be hands-on programming in Python on the imagi platform. And it's free to create an account, so you can go out and create an account, and then you'll be able to code along with me. Awesome. And on that note, let me just dive in. I'll get started. The slide looks like fleshy green for me, perhaps the same for you, but it fits the theme that we're igniting girls' passion for computer science and empowering all educators. So let me just get started with a bit of an introduction of myself and the company. So at Imagi, we are essentially reimagining access to coding education and hoping to build a more inclusive and diverse pipeline for the future of tech. A little bit about myself. So my name is Dora, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Imagi. So we're a small startup, and we're actually based in Sweden. So I have all these emojis here. It's because I was born in Hungary. I'm based in Sweden, but I actually started at NYU, so spent some time in the US. And I frequently visit, and we primarily work with US public schools, mostly around like New York State, New Jersey, and Virginia. And my other emojis, they are there to represent some of my hobbies. So I live in Scandinavia, where we really, really like to swim and run and do sports. And I also really enjoy reading and learning. And I mean, I think for anyone in education, of course, it's good to have a perspective of lifelong learning and wanting to always just expand our minds. And like I mentioned, I studied at NYU. I was in their global scholarship program, so I spent some time in New York, but also at other NYU campuses. I studied computer science and neuroscience in undergrad, and then I moved on to study human-computer interaction in my master's degree. I also worked as a software engineer and as a UX designer before actually diving full-time into edtech. But my connection with education, my entire family has been made up of teachers, and I used to tutor. That has been my main job, but I never got into proper classroom. I just used to teach after school coding programs. And so that's how I became sort of familiar with the coding space and the emerging kind of STEM education space. And what I would love to do, I hope this will work. So we'll also give this one a try. I'm going to copy this link into the chat as well, but you can also just grab your phones and actually scan this QR code. And so I would love to, sorry, I'll just copy this into the chat. I would love to see if you're able to join this quick poll. I love this tool. This is also from Sweden. It's called Menti. What I would love to understand, you will see once you open up the link, actually let me do that myself, is that I will just ask a few quick questions from you. So it should look like this if you open up the screen. So there's a question, how you're feeling, and then we will also dive into some other questions. So I will just give it a second to see if you're actually able to join, hopefully. And then I will be sharing the results. Okay, so let me pull this up. Okay, so right, thank you so much. Okay, so seems like many of you are feeling quite wonderful today. We'll jump on to the next question, which is I was really, really curious about. So have you personally done any coding before? So categories I define are pretty loose. Okay, amazing. So some identify as coders and some have done a little bit of coding. Awesome, wonderful, thank you. And then the third question I had is just a bit, okay, I'll wait, sorry, a moment just to see. Okay, awesome. So we are trending towards being coders here. Yeah, so what best describes you? Educator, school leader, just ethics specialist, or some other role? Wonderful. Okay, thank you. Um, so now that I have a bit of understanding of everyone's background, it's going to help me a bit in guiding our session. But before we dive into like hands-on coding, I have a bit of a background that I would love to tell you about and how actually Imagi came about. So the basic sort of principle on which I started working with Imagi was how could we have more gender diversity in tech? So like I mentioned, I work as a software engineer. I actually was called the girl on the seventh floor because there were simply no other women engineers where I worked. And so this experience really led me to question like why is there just this lack of diversity in our industry. And beyond just the fact that there's lack of diversity, what I was really preoccupied with is that I truly believed and still do that tech is our future. It's one of the most powerful tools to shape our future. And so if women are not equally involved with tech, then we don't have an equal chance to shape, to contribute to our future. And so that was really the core motivation to why I started working on Imagi. And so when I say that tech is our future, obviously not just claiming it, but referring to real numbers, the size of the digital economy, and the percentage that it takes up in terms of global GDP, and both in the EU and in the US. And also, what's important, even with the current sort of like tech layoffs and tech getting negative reps in the news, actually the employment rate is growing much faster in tech than in any other industry. And so when I talk about women not being part of tech equally, so in Europe, for example, women make up about 17% of the tech workforce. And I think what's super interesting about the US is that actually 37% of computer scientists were women in 1995, whereas today it's 24%. So there has been a significant decrease. And so unfortunately, this kind of exercise of logic holds true as it is today. And so the other reason why this is quite important is because coming from kind of like a human computer interaction background and understanding that many of us design technologies that we kind of understand, if we want technology to benefit everyone, we need to make sure that diversity among the creators also exists, so we get diverse perspectives. And so I have a few examples here of what happens when there is no diversity in tech. So, like I mentioned, I was born in Hungary, and when I started working on Imagi and creating this tool for learning to code, there was an article written about our work in the Hungarian version of the Forbes magazine. But of course, most of my friends are from the US or from abroad, so everyone started to Google Translate the article. And so, interestingly enough, when they Google translated, the article referred to me as he. And so everyone is asking me, why do they refer to you as he? And so the Hungarian language does not have gender pronouns. So it was up to Google Translate to make an educated guess whether I would be male or female. And write like a story about a tech CEO tends to be about men. So hence the translation said he. And so this is not an isolated case. It happens in many different languages. So I think maybe Spanish is something that more are familiar with. But if you translated the manager thank the receptionist from English to Spanish, it would assume that el gerente, so the manager, is male, and then la recepcionista, so the receptionist, is female. And so what happened is that this was, I think, about 3 years ago when a really big debate came up about about this topic, and women started to notice these gender discrepancies and gender biases in the Google translation algorithm. And so there has been efforts to address this question. And so, for example, if today I write it into Google Translate in Hungarian, so this super complex word to the left means this person is a CEO, then actually Google Translate offers you an option with she and with he. And also, if you have a sentence that's quite complex, but it has my name, so a female name, then again, the translation is correct. But as soon as you remove the female indicator name and the sentence is more complex, we actually fall back to the same old pattern of gender bias in the translation algorithm. So even though time passed and this problem was addressed, it still exists and persists. And I'm not trying to pick on Google. It's the exact same thing on Facebook's translation, like embedded translation on the platform. And so this is a problem that sort of like persists across the industry. And I mean, some of these are really just mild inconveniences or maybe actually even cause laughter. But the problem is often these gender biases that are built into technology actually lead to like significant kind of discrimination against women that has a serious impact on their life. So one example was the Apple Card, which when it was launched, it actually gave women lower credit limit. So essentially limited women's access to wealth for no other apparent reason that they were women. And so this became a pretty big public scandal again, also because Apple's co-founder Steve Wozniak had tweeted that the same thing happened to him and his wife. And so essentially, I think Apple sort of like blamed it on the bank behind the product, which was Goldman Sachs, and it just became a really big public debate on whose fault it is, and you know, like who is behind the algorithm. There are humans who have to take some of the responsibility and the ownership and making sure that we build inclusive technologies. And so the list of these like industry misses are quite long, and some examples include like VR headsets. When first VR headsets came out, they actually caused women nausea, dizziness, because they have been just simply tested with men. And voice recognition, I experienced this myself. I used to work in Cisco's design research lab, and actually our tools were always trained on the data of the employees. And so it was mostly male employees. So my voice couldn't even start up our own system. So it wasn't recognized. And for example, like phone sizes that assume that a woman would always carry the phone with them, but it doesn't actually fit women's hands or pockets. But I think what's also important just from like a startup perspective is, again, just going back to this idea that technology is an enabler to solve problems. And famously, Y Combinator, the startup incubator, says that the way to get startup ideas is not to try to think of ideas, but it's to look for problems, and preferably problems that you yourself have. And so then the question is like, who is going to solve the problems of people who are not in tech? And so that's why we need this diversity of perspectives, again, to make sure that technology will benefit everyone. And so obviously my personal experience when it comes to the diversity spectrum and the different dimensions of diversity is having been a woman in tech. But of course, there's many different dimensions to this question. What I personally experienced led to me working together with young girls and understanding what is it that we could do to our products at Teach Coding to make it more inclusive for them. And specifically, what I understood is that at the age of 12, there's still an equal interest between boys and girls when it comes to tech. And so this is based on research published by Google and Gallup, but I also have seen this kind of really big shift that happens afterwards, and essentially towards the end of middle school, a lot of girls lose their interest and confidence for tech. And so this was the origin of imagi then, creating something that could make it fun and gender inclusive to learn coding with. And so some of the other things that were really important when we started imagi, like I mentioned, I used to also volunteer and teach coding to kids, and I used to use a lot of block-based tools. So Scratch, I could use Spheros, I've used a lot of tools. And I think the other thought and understanding I had was that it was quite hard to transition from that to actual script-based coding. And if you really wanted to make a difference in the diversity and number of girls who will be getting into tech careers, it's important that we don't just teach block-based coding, but we kind of set them up for success for actually later transitioning into script-based coding. So the whole vision was to teach a script-based coding language, and we landed on Python, which is one of the most popular coding languages in the world, and especially now with the rise of AI, it's increasingly important and popular. And doing that in a way that is creative and social and kind of like links to self-expression. So what does that mean? All these pixel art and animation that you see, these are projects that were coded in our app. And so today I will be showing you the imagi platform. So essentially, it is a platform that can be used either on the web, so any laptop you have or Chromebook, or there's also an iPad and a tablet version of it. So this tool requires only teachers to sign up. So today, maybe some of you have already gone ahead and actually signed up on the platform. And this is important because we don't want to collect any student data. So you as teachers can sign up and then create student accounts. I'll show this in a second. So this way, we can just be compliant with COPPA and GDPR and everything else. And there is actual lesson plans in the platform, so that you are sort of set up to start teaching right away. Of course, you're welcome to modify these lesson plans. We'll look into this as well. So here's the website. Again, it's in the chat. So I invite you to register now if you haven't done so yet. So it's edu.imaginelabs.com. I also have the tab up, 1 second, but I'm already logged in, so I can just show you that. So once you have logged in, and just feel free to go through the login process, you will be landing in your main area where you can create your first classroom. So that's where we're going to be meeting. So again, yeah, I'll just like my own comments there in the chat. So it's edu.imagi.labs.com. Okay. And as we move forward, again, the link is in the chat, so you can sign up also later. There is one more thing I wanted to mention, is that there is an optional add-on to our platform, and it's called the Imagi Charm. And so I'm going to show this to you now. So this little gadget, the Imagi Charm, some people call it a Tamagotchi that you can code. So essentially, it is a display that brings your code to life. So anything that you have programmed comes to life, and it can be uploaded through Bluetooth connection. So I'm so sorry, where I'm at, it's a bit dark, so I'm not sure if you can clearly see the project. But for example, this is, I believe, a bunny that's hopping around. But as we're coding and we're going through it, I will actually demonstrate to you how we can upload our coding project. And then finally, there's also a mobile app version, which actually just allows your students, if they want to continue learning at home. It has a global community, so their parents allow them to sign up, then they can sign up and share their coding projects with other kids. And the mobile app also has some self-paced learning steps, so it has these levels, as they call them. Okay, but so that's about the background. Let's actually get into coding. And I just have this image here to kind of symbolize how I felt when I first started to learn coding. So I officially started to learn coding in college. And I remember during my introduction to computer science course, which was in Python, I really felt like it was a black box, it's like a matrix, what are we really doing? And I felt like we were learning these really complicated concepts, and the setup of the IDE, so the development environment, was so complicated. And I really just wanted to get to results and seeing what my code does. And so that's a bit what we are doing with Imagi. So trying to get to an outcome and a motivation first. It's a bit like baking, oh, I'm trying to make this cake. This is the recipe to get there. And so in our case, oh, I want to code a figure from Minecraft, and then I have to do the design. I have to figure out the pixels, the locations, how to animate it. And so that's a bit about how the process goes with Imagi. Okay, so we'll dive into coding. And what I hope you will also see, I really love this analogy about how some kids, or some of us, even adults, when it comes to learning a new language, some of us are really creative and love to read books or listen to music or poetry even in a foreign language. And some of us really prefer logic and maybe, need to understand the grammar rules. And we think about it the same way with learning coding language as well. And so we see that some kids really just truly enjoy creating art, and along the way they pick up the knowledge. And some of them truly want to understand the logic behind. And so we try to keep the space open for both. So yeah, so I think we have about 14 minutes. And so this is the time that we're going to be using for coding, and then also questions. And so in today's lesson here, we'll really just start to use Python to program the color of the pixels of this 8x8 matrix. That is our Imagi Charm, and that's the kind of visual simulator in the Imagi EG platform. So before we dive in, just the definition. So I've been mentioning that we're using Python, which is of course a snake, and it's also a programming language. And like any other languages, it has its own rules that must be followed when we code. So when you get error messages, it might be simply because a colon was missing, or there was an extra space, or there needs to be an extra space. And so these are actually called bugs, these small errors. Maybe some of you already know this. And maybe some of you already know the story that this name actually comes from the reality that many years ago, when computers were like entire rooms and real bugs could get stuck inside them and break them. The same way, in a nice analogy, a bug is something that breaks your code. And then in our platform, we're really working to make error messages friendly and helpful, because I think that's something that we understood, that kids can get really demotivated when the code doesn't work. But error messages are actually your best friends when you're coding. You can learn from them, they can help you improve, and they can help you make your code work. So we really try to emphasize that error messages and bugs are your friends. Okay, so we're going to get into our first activity, which is essentially creating our first ever shape. And this is going to be a heart, and learning how to turn on the pixels of the 8x8 matrix. And to do that, I'm just going to bring up first this analogy of a chessboard. So I don't know if anyone here likes to play chess or plays chess, but I will ask for a bit of participation here now from the audience. So maybe you can drop it into the chat. So you see where I put this cross on the chessboard. How would you define the position? Okay, someone already put it in. Wonderful. Don't even have to finish my sentences. So right, that's D6, right? So D6 is the location of the cross. So it's very similar in our imagi matrix, which we call M. The only, or not the only, but the one of the differences is that both the columns and the rows are actually numbers, so we don't have a letter identifier. And then what's important in the case of a matrix is that it starts with 0. So it's an 8x8 matrix, but it goes from 0 to 7. Okay, sorry, I already gave away the answer here. So it goes from 0 to 7, so it has 8 rows and it has 8 columns. Okay, so right, so how many pixels does M have? If anyone wants to super quickly type in the number, 64. Awesome, thank you. Amazing. So what is the index of the pixel? What is the index of the row, and what is the index of the column of the pixel that's colored on the screen? Again, feel free to type the answer. Yes, so really good question. So we actually start with the row. So it's going to be, yeah, this side, which like gives the row number. We need to start with the row number and then the column. So horizontal first and then vertical. Yes, okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. One very, very fast participant, but I hope this is not deteriorating anyone's ambition for coding. So correct, it's 2, 3. And the way how we actually write it in the Imagine Pixel coding world is, this is almost correct that you put in the chat, but it is essentially with a square bracket instead of the regular brackets, and you have to put M, so the identifier for the matrix right before it. Okay, so we will now soon get into the practicality of doing this on the platform. So essentially, you learn how to identify a single pixel, and I forgot to highlight this, but the way to turn the light on is by simply making that pixel equal to on. And so we are going to try to do the same. I'm sorry, I said that it will make it hard, but we're actually making a smiley face. That was my mistake. We are going to try to code this smiley face. So I invite you to get into your platform, and I'm going to show the tab now quickly. So here in the imagi platform, I have many classrooms because I've been doing a lot of mock classes and whatnot. but I can just simply navigate to the projects page. And you can see I, for example, already have this project coded, but I'm just going to start from scratch now. So I'll create a new project. I'll give it a name. I'm going to call it smiley face. And I'm just going to save the draft, even though it's an empty project, just to make sure I get into the habit of saving the project. And so we remember we're trying to create a smiley face. Like I said, we are using square brackets. Maybe I'm going to zoom in a little bit just so that you can see it better. So in order to turn on a single pixel, it could be any location. I'm just randomly picking and make it equal to on, and then run the code. And then you can see that it will actually show up. Now, today in this exercise, we're making a smiley face, and there is kind of a cheat feature called design. So I'm just going to show it now here. I will actually copy over the design here. So this is 2, 5, and then, right. So this is the shape that we would like to code. And so what I can do is, you see here now, I'm kind of following this design. So I actually need the first pixel to be 2, 2. So I'm going to program that. And then I can also just copy paste and modify the pixel I need. So I'm going for the second one, which is going to be 2, 5. And then meanwhile, sorry, I have so many tabs open, so if there were any questions I've missed. Okay, no, we're good. So you see, I'm kind of like following my design. I can go over to the code tab, run my code, and then see, okay, so far I've created the 2 eye pixels. But then if I keep going, I'll start making the mouth as well. So I'm just live coding here along. Again, go back to the code and run the code. So you can see how I'm adding the pixels. And yeah, I invite you to just do this on your own. Yes, I will teach you in a second how to make the range. And this is also like part of our pedagogical kind of process, that when it comes to like coding, we also require the kids to first like actually just play with the pixels. We'll get there shortly, I promise. And one thing I wanted to show you meanwhile is just that I do have an imagi charm here, right, that I showed you. And so if I want, I can actually upload this code to the charm. So right now it only has 3 pixels. So the smiley face is not ready yet, but I'm going to just quickly finish off here. So this is going to be 6, 2, and then, but I guess you get the idea. I'm just going to finish it so I can have a full project to show you. And then this is going to be 5, 6. And I think also like a fun thing here, often what happens is that, let's say I mistyped and made this 5, oh, sorry, that was correct. Made this 6, 7, and then you will see, oh, oops, that's actually far out. So it allows for kind of a debugging from the student side, that they have a visual output and then see, oh, this actually doesn't look like what I wanted it to look like. And I have uploaded the smiley face to the charm. So we finished this project. Okay, so this was the super, super basics of creating with imagi. But now if I jump back into my presentation, we will move on to the next level. The way how our curriculum is built up is that you achieve what we call essentially different superpowers, and superpowers at different levels. So here you just learned about the concept of the matrix, and you earned the Matrix Master level 1. So before we go into the range, which I was asked about in the chat, we are going to do something else first, which is assigning colors, which is a very, very natural like next step here. So instead of writing on, what you can do is first use one of our predefined colors. And so what I mean by predefined is that these are global like variables, so that we define them in the imagi verse. And so whenever you write, I'll just share again a tab. Instead of on, if you write r, which we had defined to be red, or b that's blue, these will be actually turning the pixels colorful. And so I can just show a couple other examples. So O stands for orange, M for magenta, P for purple, I have G for green, and then I have A for aqua. And so these are all in the lesson plans. And again, I can also just show you if I upload it to the Imagi channel, it's a very, very colorful smiley face. Okay, so this is a quick, but usually for students, very satisfactory next step. So you can make your designs way more interesting by bringing in color. And yeah, feel free to do that on your own and just play with it a little bit. And so this is what we call our color creator superpower level 1. And so I mentioned already the word variables, right? So these are global variables, but we can actually define our own variables. And so on the smiley face example, what we see is that our face has eyes and then it has a mouth, right? So something that we can do is actually introduce a variable for the eye color and then assign that variable to the pixels that represent the eye. Variable naming rules in Python involve having an underscore in between the words if it's a multi-word variable name. So I will also, again, just show you this on my actual coding project. Also, something that's important is that if we use a variable, we have to always define the variable before we call it. So in this case, I'll just show you what I mean by this. Essentially, if I assign eye color to our 2 eye pixels, you see now those are aqua colored. I can change it to be blue, so it's going to be dark blue. But if I had written the code where I assign the value to the eye color variable, then it wouldn't work because then you're trying to use eye color before you actually define it. So this is one of those cases where an error message can be quite helpful. And so if you wanted to, you could do the same for the mouth color. And so that way it's essentially quicker to kind of change the mouth color and the eye color than if you always have to individually assign the colors. Okay, and so here's the example with defining both the eye color and the mouth color. So this was the variable veteran superpower, and I'm running through this like super quickly today just for representation purposes. Of course, with students, depending on the grade level, this on its own with a lot more explanation examples and whatnot could take an entire class or even 2. And then, sorry, this is really just like keeps going before we get to the range, but one more extension to the colors is that we don't just have our predefined colors, but we can actually use the RGB color system to construct any color that we would like from combining red, green, and blue. And so the RGB color model, which probably you had already talked about in technology classes, is what is being used in electronic systems, and it's an additive color system. So essentially what it means is that we can add together as much or as little red, green, and blue as we want. And the way to do that is that the value for red, green, and blue for each of them goes from 0 to 255. And so depending on how much of it we mix into our color, we get different results. So I have a little quiz again, so feel free to drop answers in the chat. Truly appreciate the participation. But does anyone know what color this code represents? So if it's 25500. Okay. Yes, correct. So it is red. So RGB starts with red. Okay. How about the next one? Awesome. Yes. So it's green. Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so the last one is blue. I will not wait for this answer, but we'll make it a bit trickier. So how about this one? If it's 255, 255, 255. All guesses are welcome. Yes. So I always receive this answer first, and it would make sense. But the way how the RGB system works is that when you mix everything together, that's when you get white. So it's kind of like the opposite of like the mixing. Yeah, exactly. In art class. So it's actually going to be white for the 255, 255, 255. And then when we have 000, that's what's going to be black. Um, okay, now I have this kind of helper in the corner here. So I'm curious if someone could write in the chat a guess for this color, the aqua. So that's between the green and the blue. And I'm just gonna get a sip of water while you write up your guesses. Okay, yes, correct. Exactly, thank you. So right, so you have to completely remove the red because that's on the other side. So it's 0 for red and then 255, 255 for green and blue. And then, okay, we'll do one more example. So magenta, which is this one. Awesome, correct, yes. So here is the green that's missing from our mix. So it's 255, 0, 255. Wonderful. Okay, I have one last one, which honestly, if you notice, like really good on you. I think you can just take a guess. But what could 255, 165, and 0 be? Orange, yes, I believe that's the correct answer. Yes, wonderful. Thank you. So now we went through a bit of an RGB training. And so, like I mentioned on our platform, you can actually use these colors that you create to bring any color to life. And so you can write the RGB values yourself. So here for the eye color, I could, instead of writing blue, write 255, I don't know, 165, 30. I don't even know what color this is going to be, but we're going to see, and that's also exciting. So that's some kind of orange. But there is also the design feature, which I showed. And so you can actually use this color wheel and pick a color that you like and copy it out and then actually paste it into your code. So you can bring any color to life. Okay. So now that we cleared that out, that was our level 2 for color creator. Oh my god, I'm so sorry. I thought we'll get to range sooner, and I just keep being surprised. But I have one more thing here. Is again, I think a bit of a crowd pleaser. Sorry, is 0 at the edge of the circle and 255 center. Yes, I let me just go back to the platform so we can see this. Right, that's correct. So if you can see here, because the numbers will automatically change, if I go towards the middle, all the numbers are increasing, right? And then as you go out to the edges, you will make one color be 0 always, but there's an extra layer to it, which is you can actually make everything darker. So to get to 0, that's you have to use the slider as well. So essentially, there's a bit of a difference in color and then also brightness, because you would kind of have the same color but different brightness. If you just, for example, instead of 255, 255, 255, well, that's white. You could halve them. It would still be sort of white, but just less bright, if that makes sense. Okay. So I was just talking about, yes, a bit of a crowd pleaser when it comes to comes to our kids, is a capability that we call blink rate. So blink rate is again a global variable, and it determines how many times your design should blink per second. And so what this does, it will just make your project blink. It has to be a whole or a fractional number between 0 and 3. Computer is 0.0 and short. And so let me show how this works. So I can just write blink rate, so it's blink underscore rate, and make it, again, any value between 0 and 3, and it can be fractional, so it can be 1.3, for example. And if I run to my code, then you will see that it's blinking. There's a very important reason why it's maximum 3. Just did a basic safety search to make sure we're not causing any sort of epileptic seizures, so it can't blink too fast. So that's just sort of the limitation that we put on top of it. And then you can see that it's also blinking on the imagi term. Okay. Yes. Okay, so apparently I did not have the range included here today, but because we do have a bit of time and I want to make sure that I show that, I'll just pull up a different presentation. So just give me a quick second, and I will pull up those slides. Meanwhile, let me know if you have any other questions or anything you would want to see on the platform. What I can also do is show you within the platform, if I just step out of my project, I can come to my teaching slides area. And in the teaching slides is where I have the lesson plans. And I believe it might be in lesson 2 that we have the range. So let me just actually look right here. So the lesson plans are essentially Google slide templates that you as an educator can make a copy of if you want, and just use it as it is if you prefer that way. There is always quizzes, there is additional notes for you as the educator to help explain to your students the concept that we're teaching. So that was lesson 2, for example, and then this is lesson 3 that I'm showing now. Oh, there we go. Okay, so this is the example I was looking for. So to be able to program an entire row of colors. So let me just jump right into this one. Essentially, for that, we will need to learn about a concept called for loops. And so the example that we use here is to code a rainbow. And so for loops are essentially a tool to repeat a group of instructions several times. So it shortens any repetitive task, which is honestly the entire purpose of doing coding, to make tasks that can be repeated, just repeat by the computer and not manually. And there are different types of loops, and we use for loops when we know how many times we want to repeat a group of instructions. And so this is exactly what we're doing now, right? Like turning entire, like individual pixels on. And here's this example where we're trying to turn an entire row into red. If you did this individually, right, it would be 8 lines of code. And you can see the solution here. And so, yeah, this is another quiz. So if we use this method that we've been doing so far, like how many lines of code would it take to essentially program every single pixel in the matrix? Yes, it's a trick question. So remember, the matrix starts with 0 and it goes from 0 to 7. So that's why it's 64, because it's 8 by 8 matrix. I'm sorry, in my excitement, I have jumped off of this room. Okay, but I'm back. So, so yeah, it would take us 64 lines of code. And so even though this is correct technically, there is a much better way to do it. And so that's where we bring in loops. Okay, so I have another quiz. So what parts of the code from step one, so here, are repeating? So what is repeating in every single line? Is it A, B, or C? Correct. So both of these are repeating, right? So that gives us a little hint. Um, Another thing that we can notice is that the index for the column number is increasing by an increment of 1, going all the way from 0 to 7. And so this is what we're going to do. We're going to use a for loop. And the for loop is consisting of a header and then a body. And so the header consists of the keyword for, the loop variable, which in this case is going to be column, so col, the keyword in, and then a range. So the range, it can be a very tricky concept because it's trying to mess with us. It has to start from 0 because we're going from 0, but it ends with 8 instead of 7. And the reason for that is that the initial value is inclusive and the closing value is non-inclusive. So if you divide range 0 through 8, the numbers will iterate from 0 to 7. And then it has to close with a colon. And so the body consists of one or more indented statements. Every statement that's indented is going to be executed every time when we loop through the for loop. Okay, so these are like our very, very detailed lesson plans that you can use with students. What I'm going to do here, just for the sake of time, because we don't have so much time left, I'm even going to copy the code here into the chat so you can take, okay, sorry, it gets broken and not into the perfect format, but I just did that so that you can actually copy it into your Edu Pro platforms. So you can start a new project, and if you copy the code, or you can type it up, but just so that you see it working, you'll see that it colors essentially the 2 lines. So to address the initial question, which was, I think, how to do the range from like 2 to 5, you can play a bit with the range. So if I wrote 2 to 8, then you will see that it starts at 2. If I write 2 to 6, then it will go from 2 to 5. So, you know, this feedback process with the visual outcome can help you understand better how it actually works. Yes, I would just love to hear if there is any questions. Otherwise, I will also just jump a bit back into my presentation and start to wrap up, mindful of our time. But so hopefully anyone who wanted to manage to sign up on a platform, like I said, this works on the web, or if your students have iPads or other tablets, you can also get the app on the store. Something I forgot to show or didn't show yet is that as the educator, like I mentioned, you can create a classroom. So for example, here's my grade 5s. And well, let's go into I have another grade that had really cool projects, but anyways, we'll stick with grade 5. What we can do is actually just add students by nicknames. So of course you can add any identifier as well. But yeah, if I have another student who joined the class, Jack, then I added them to, apparently I already had Jack, so it will be Jack 2 or Jack 1. They are added to the classroom. And so what I can do, I can just print reminder cards for my students. So essentially, this automatically gets generated with their username and class access code and password. Or you can also get this as a CSV file, so you can hand out the login information to the students. So again, we don't collect their data. And I have already shown you some of the lesson plans that are included in the form. And so if you signed up, you should get access for free for the first 3 lessons, I believe. So you are able to get pretty far ahead and just experiment with coding. Yes. If there's a directory of all the functions, yes, that's a wonderful question. So I'll just jump right back to the platform. So here you see a few extra resources. There is something called Teacher Handbook. There is an educator community. So we have a Facebook community where teachers are sharing, asking, answering. And then there is a link called Imagi Learning Center. And so that is the directory. So in this learning center, I'm just going to share the tab now. You have more kind of like free flow knowledge as well. There's a couple like really basic things. What is imagi? What Python? A bit of kind of like theoretical frameworks and knowledge around our pedagogy. Some onboarding questions like how to create classrooms and some of the things I showed. And what you're asking about is more on the coding end. And so there is essentially what we call documentation. So I think this is the closest to what you're looking for, but the glossary could also be quite helpful. Okay, sorry, let me just tap into the documentation right now. So here you would see, yeah, we call this the imagi lib, so our library of all the global variables, but then also the different functions that are available. And just today, for example, one educator from New York who's using our tools pointed out that our documentation was lacking a bit of explanation on the animation framework and how many frames there are. So this is being updated as we speak. So for example, one thing that students are usually very excited about is animations. And so yeah, all of that is explained here as well. So not just in the lesson plans. And then here, what you also have is one of my favorite resources, which is called the Imagi 30 Days of Code. So we have 30 different coding challenges or code project examples. And so these go, sorry, this is not the right place, but these are examples such as some of my favorite examples were actually created by students themselves. So there is this one, which is about programming advice. So this is a bit more complex and advanced project where you have to use the random library and actually import it. So every time you run the code, it would throw a different number on your dice. And then another one, which was again also created by a student, we call it the fortune teller / decision maker. So she created this project that would randomly tell her whether she should do her homework or watch Netflix. So there are a lot of like creative additional kind of project ideas here. Yes. And then just feel free to keep dropping your questions if you have them. I just wanted to tell you a bit that, like I said, initially we started with a consumer app. So there is an app where kids can download and learn on their own, which is really loved. But we started working with educators a bit over a year ago when we launched this like new platform. And now we have over 1,000 educators. So we're really, really excited to have new educators joining us. Like I mentioned, it's mostly on the Northeast that we currently work with educators. So some of our really loved educator ambassadors are around New York, but also in Virginia. And I think, again, what we really take pride in is not just the gender inclusivity, because really girls and boys really love it, but we really try to be teacher friendly. We understand that like teaching Python is not like the easiest thing necessarily, or it can be intimidating if you don't yourself know Python so well. So we really try to make our resources extremely detailed and kind of just ready to use in the classroom. We have a favorite quote, which is disruption on the first day always looks like a toy. This quote is actually written on the inside of the Imagi charm. And so we hope to create a playful experience that actually delivers like tangible learning outcomes, but also a way to increase critical thinking and confidence in creating with tech. And yeah, I'm going to soon wrap up, but just like going back to my initial kind of motivation sentence, we hope that with our tool, we'll be able to make sure that more girls then grow into women in tech. And so we do have an equal kind of impact on our future with the tech. And I sorry, I did want to give a shout out to my team. So I have a wonderful co-founder, Beatrice. If you ever have very technical questions, reach out. She might be the one answering. But we also have some other wonderful teammates who have, for example, worked at Epic for Kids and also who worked in US public schools. So we can better understand how to serve teachers' needs in the classroom. And then I just have two final plugs here before I stop talking. And thank you so much for listening. We do have our first global classroom challenge, because in our consumer app, on the mobile app, there is always coding challenges running. But actually next week we have a coding challenge called Coding is Art. So if you do want to test the platform with students and they have the opportunity, it could be super exciting. So this is on our website. If you go to imagilabs.com, it's actually also on a banner, so you should be able to really easily find it. And my final plug is that we also have an educator ambassador program. And so, well, I guess the deadline was today, but it's still open. So if you're interested in becoming part of a very engaged community, so we have an open community for any educator who's using our tool, but then we also have an ambassador program for educators who are excited to be a bit more deeply involved. And so that's also open, and this is also on our website. So I can just write that in the chat as well. I believe this was all from me, and I do have a final slide just for questions. Just yesterday, I tried Google's new AI feature, to do it, and asked for an image to be generated on this slide for Q&A. I'm not sure how impressed I was, but I thought it's still fun to use it. I myself am trying to keep up with the new technologies all the time. So yeah, please let me know if you have any final questions. And yeah, feel free to reach out to me directly also. I will put my email as well into the